Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 137 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. I am, as always, one of your hosts, emallson, and joining me, we have my co host, Anomoly.
Hello, hello.
And Dragonflight releases tomorrow.
I would say less than 20. It's about, what is it, 20 or 30 hours or so from now, right?
Yeah,
Launched at 6 or so. It's about 30 hours. Yeah,
yeah,
no, it is upon us.
yeah. So
The dawn of the final day,
if you
basically.
are listening to this, the day that it goes up on YouTube and in audio form on the podcast sites, um, Flight launches today.
Yeah.
Probably
Better have
like
been ready.
an hour to 2 hours after this goes live. If you're watching
Nice,
us live,
nice.
obviously tomorrow. Hello, thank you for watching.
What's up? What's up?
Um, yeah, we have the final part of our kind of retrospective of Shadowlands that we're gonna wrap up. Season 3 and Season 4 is kind of very fresh in our minds, and there's a
Yeah.
lot to talk about, but a lot that we have talked about relatively recently. So I think we're gonna do a little bit more skimming because we also have some Dragonflight stuff to talk about at the end of the episode.
hmm Yeah. Yeah, so it'll be season 3 and 4 altogether. I didn't realize how short when I was doing this. I didn't realize how short season 3 was in the grand scheme of things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I guess maybe we can talk a little bit. How was your final raid? I don't know. Are you raiding tonight? How was your final raid week? I guess or final
Uh,
raid.
you know, we killed. So we got a lockout from Anomoly. Uh, and we
Ooh.
just went and killed Denathrius. Somebody needed Denathrius for their portal. Um,
Okay.
so our final raid week of the expansion, we went back and we killed the best boss of the expansion for one final. Went back and killed Sire Denathrius. Fight's still great. Definitely
Yeah.
a little bit of a poetic ending to Shadowlands that was what we were doing on our final raid. So we're not raiding tonight. It's a night off. Expansion releases tomorrow.
Yep.
And everybody is like in prep mode for that, like very excited. It's a good time.
Awesome.
How about you
Awesome. Yeah,
guys?
we did our typical. We did mount run. So we had. I guess we didn't kill Jailer the week before, so we went in and killed Jailer for 2 mount sales on Tuesday, and then cleared to Sylvanas and did another 2 Sylvanas kills. Ran into a fun issue on Jailer. Actually, one of our we have a DK that's actually quitting, and so he was in just a like final raid or whatever,
Right.
and he had not learned the Jailer mount yet.
Oh boy.
So he actually got the loot for the Jailer mount. We had thought everybody had it. So yeah,
So you
he had
had
to
to trade it.
learn it and then like pick up the one off the body. Or sorry, I
Oh,
think he
because it's
deleted it.
unique.
Yeah, he had to delete it out of his bags, then loot it off the body, and then like trade it to the person, and then do an item restore to get the mount
Oh,
back
is
that he
this the
deleted.
person that just has all the items for all the mounts in
No,
their bag?
no, that's our hunter who's not quitting. He's still playing with us, but yeah, it wasn't him. It was our DK, which I thought was funny. So yeah, but other than that, it was a smooth. I mean, we were in and out. Like I think we were done by 9:30, and we started 8, so it was like an hour and a half to clear all that. So nice little easy final raid week, and then spent the rest of the week sort of prepping. So um, I did a bunch of like behind the scenes stuff for like getting people set up, what people are playing from a healer perspective in my guild, and getting ready for the push to what 70 tomorrow. So
Yeah, yeah.
fun.
So
It's
we,
fun. I love what we have some last people swapping around too, which is always great.
yeah.
So trying to keep all that together
I
is
think we
fun.
talk about this at the end, but I'm curious to touch base again on what you all are doing, like what people in your guild are doing for leveling and stuff. But once we get to the end, we're talking about Dragonflight stuff. I think that's where we're
Yeah,
gonna
we can.
wrap up is like leveling stuff.
Yeah, we can touch on that there. Yeah, for sure. So cool. So I guess maybe do a quick little week in review and then jump into the patch stuff because there wasn't that. I mean, honestly, not that much this week. I think I did want to touch on before we jump into the official things. There's a couple more interviews that came out. We're probably not going to talk about them because we talked about a bunch of interviews last week and really no new crazy news from like there's an
Yeah.
Ian and Annie interview and there's like one lore interview with Noble talking about the story. And there's something else, but not anything major from an announcement perspective there for Dragonflight. So, two things though for this week. Number one, World of Warcraft launched November 23rd, 2004, which is 18 years ago.
Yeah.
So crazy to think people are playing this game that were not alive when the game actually came or launched. I funnily enough, I did not play at launch. I don't know about well,
I did.
I know you didn't, but
Yeah.
I did not play until I got the game in December, so like a couple weeks after launch. So I missed the whole launch fun and all that type of stuff. But
You mean the thing where you couldn't log into the game because the
yeah,
servers were down all the time?
exactly. Missed out on a lot of free game time. I don't know if like that was a thing Blizzard used to do is like if servers were down for a day, you just got a free day of game time.
Yeah.
So there was like I think at one point they were down like the server I was on was down for like 2 or 3 days, and they gave us a whole month for free. At the time, being a poor college student, I was really excited about that because
Yeah.
like it
Yeah.
meant I could afford to play for another month. But yeah, no. Game came out 18 years ago. It was super crazy. It'll be interesting to see if they do something. Like I'm excited to see what 20 years looks like, particularly in terms of like maybe an event and stuff that they do.
Yeah.
I know for 10 years they gave a like I this is like God how old I am, but if
What
you had a sub for 10 years, you got the
the statue?
Ragnaros statue,
Yeah.
which is really cool. And then I got an orc statue too, or no, not Ragnaros, the orc statue, on the horse or whatever. Um, but yeah, no, it's hopefully maybe they do something for 20 years. Kept my sub up, so um but yeah, World of Warcraft very, very old. The other thing that came out this week is the big, I guess maybe it's the first video of a series that Preach is doing, but the big Preach interview. So if you don't know Preach, he's a content creator primarily for WoW up until about a year ago when he basically quit doing WoW content right around the time of the scandal. So a lot of the sexual like assault allegations that came out. I think along with the fact that he wasn't the biggest fan of the game at that point,
Yeah,
sort of quit doing
Shadowlands
content.
was not.
Yeah.
It was like we were very negative on patch 9.0 and
Yeah.
9.1, and that's not unique to us.
No.
So a combination of that and the sexual harassment stuff, he just kind of said, "I'm done with WoW for
Yeah.
until they clean up house, I guess." And went and did other games. So he's been doing Final Fantasy stuff. He's been doing Guild Wars 2 stuff, other games like that.
Yeah.
Checking them out, kind of surveying the space, which I think is actually really neat because it gives a lot of perspective. If you haven't played other MMOs, like if you've only played WoW, there's a lot of interesting things that you can pick up from other games, even on like a
Mhm.
personal opinion level. Like I've never been, I was always kind of opposed to personal housing on like a like this doesn't seem very interesting kind of gameplay level. That was just my
Right.
opinion. And we have a guild house in Final Fantasy, right? And honestly,
Super cool.
personal housing, I could take or leave, but the guild house is cool as hell.
Yeah. Yeah. So Preach has come back. Well, I guess kind of come back, but basically he like flew himself out there, flew out I think some folks to help him film, so some staff, and basically spent a week at Blizzard interviewing a bunch of people, not only current Blizzard sort of employees, like Ian, Morgan Day, he even interviewed Holly, and I forget the other gentleman's name, but basically the vice president of all of Warcraft, and then Holly, who is the vice president or executive vice president of World of Warcraft specifically. Um, and so interviewed them. Also interviewed Lore, who was the old community manager, who has since left Blizzard at this point. Really interesting. So if you want to get a sort of an inside look at Blizzard, how they think about things, go check it out. I mean, I think people are generally probably like I don't know. A lot of some of the comments I saw are a little bit negative. Like this is just a PR piece for Blizzard, which is I think one way to look at it. But I think the other thing is like it gives you sort of an idea of how they think about a little bit more of like how they think about expansions and doing the development and stuff like that. And like
Yeah,
I think a little bit more in like a relaxed setting, which is cool. I will say the most interesting part is actually the opening probably 20 minutes where they talk about classic, which is like
yeah,
the idea of like they were like, yeah, we'll do classic. People play for 2 months and that'll be it. Like it'll be like our little pet project. We'll probably lose a bunch of money on it, but whatever. Our fans really want it. Like our hardcore fans really want it. Not realizing like classic is like probably the reason Warcraft has like kept its sub numbers up, right?
right.
Is just because of that. So I
Um,
found that pretty interesting.
I think there's a lot of interest. I think there's basically two interesting things about overall design that pop
Mm.
up later. And one of them is the kind of like switch where they did very explicitly in Warlords of Draenor a switch over to what they called modular design, where something was designed to be only a part of that one expansion and then they move on from it.
Mhm.
and the implications of that, the reasons they did it, and also comments on their development timeline and why they have been so slow to react to the issues with, artifact power, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's also a comment about leveling that we might come back to later. There's another hour plus long video that came out this week that uh, you know, was also very interesting. Not any interview though, just
Yeah.
interesting, an opinion
Yeah,
piece, basically.
the dev timeline thing. So like that was so like the example they give is actually the BFA artifact power with or sorry, Azerite power with like Legion's artifact power, and the fact that
Right.
like when they launched Legion, they were pretty much producing BFA, meaning like
Right.
they were building features, like putting together the major systems already at that point. So like it's one of those things where like I didn't realize the timeline was that long. Like
Yeah.
I had known that they started thinking about expansions, even they'd be 2 expansions ahead, and maybe like starting like initial design on the next expansion as they launched the current one. But they were saying like we were like laying the groundwork for Azerite power and like building that into like everything, even as Legion launched. So like Legion initially launched, everyone loved artifact power. Like everyone thought it was great,
Yeah.
always something to do. And it wasn't until the end of Legion where people were like, this is a grind. This is annoying. Like, I
Yeah.
don't want to have to like every day log in and get this stuff. And
Yeah.
at that point, it's way too late to change what they built for BFA. So BFA, we
Right.
had Azerite power because of
Even
that
yeah,
late fee.
even among the high end community, like I think the initial response to artifact power was good up until you started hitting stuff like Nighthold, where people needed to grind to get
Yeah.
that final 5 points that were really impactful. Um, but early Legion, you didn't need that much artifact power to get all your new traits every week. It was kind of great.
Yeah.
That honeymoon period where the system was really humming along nicely.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was
And
and I guess for anybody that's curious, this is not a uniquely Blizzard thing. Interestingly, the set design for Magic the Gathering operates on a similar about 2 years in advance timeline. So when they have issues as well, sometimes they are also rather slow to respond to them in terms of design,
mhm.
um, because of just the fact that they are like when a set releases, the two, three, four sets that are coming after for the next year uh, are already very late in the stage of development.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the whole modular design idea that you mentioned is interesting in that the reasoning they did it that way was because they thought they were going to have a like system bloat. So they
Right.
wanted to build systems that would end so you didn't have a new player start in BFA and have to learn every system from Legion, from Cataclysm, from WAD, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I get that aspect of it, and I think that's one of the maybe the communication things they could have done better, which is like people
Yeah.
viewed like Warfronts or even Islands as like thing that like in an expansion that was thrown away, but like they talk about like there's tech from all of that stuff
Yeah.
that like makes it into like the next iteration. Like so like Torghast is built on top of tech that started with islands, right? Like
Right.
there's some of that there. So yeah,
And
so I mean it's I don't know, it's an interesting like behind the scenes look, I think that's a
yeah.
little bit different than like the canned interview questions we get from like the Twitch streams of like
And
people.
that's actually one of the interesting things I think about these interviews is that one of the stipulations that Preach made that he was able to make because he's actually such a kind of high profile figure in the community
Hmm.
is that they wouldn't be like pre-approved lists of questions in canned interviews. So
Yeah.
it's um I mean he's not one of the kind of interviewers that's gonna try and throw some gotcha questions at them, I don't think.
No,
Um
not to like throw them under the bus or anything like that.
right. But that does mean that we're probably gonna get some people people say like people talk. People say things that maybe they wouldn't have if it had to go through PR review first for a pre-canned response to a pre-approved question, right?
Yeah.
Not that that's like bad, like I made it sound, but people will be more like genuine and will give a more straightforward answer, even if it's by way of a meandering statement.
Right.
Uh, if they don't have PR go over their answers.
Exactly, exactly. Or even get like a chance to like preview them, right? Because you can still, even if you don't have PR go over your answers, if you can think about something, you might change the way you'd answer it versus like in the moment or
Yeah,
like what you're feeling. So
yeah,
no, yeah, it's a good, it's what, an hour and 10 or hour and 50 minutes, something like that. It's
yeah,
a decent watch. And I know that he mentioned at the end there are like other maybe single interviews that are going to come out. So this is sort of like more of like an overview of his whole week at Blizzard. So it's like
yeah.
parts of interviews from a bunch of different people. It seemed like he's going to sort of publish like single interviews with certain folks like all the way through, which will be cool.
Yeah, in addition to obviously this podcast, it makes for great listening material while you are leveling in Dragonflight.
Yeah, but we have 136 episodes or 37 episodes you can listen to
Yes,
if
yes.
you want.
Of course, starting
Um,
with this one.
yes, exactly. Um, so cool. So that's basically it for the sort of the weekend review. Not too much, like I said, else happened. So maybe
There
we start
are
looking at
there
what's
are
up.
hotfix things. We are going to talk about them more towards the end. We're going to kind of go in chronological order here. We're going to start with our retro stuff from season 3, season 4, and then we're going to get into Dragonflight stuff including the Brewmaster Mistweaver.
Yep, which were good. At least for Mistweaver. I don't know about Brewmaster. I'm assuming they're good.
We'll talk about
Fair enough. Fair enough. So yeah, so cool. So 9.2 retrospective. Oh man, so this was of course this is the Zereth Mortis Sepulcher patch, you know, creation catalyst, tier sets back, all that fun stuff. And yeah, this was the patch after the ripcord was being pulled. So
It's
it's
very
got a lot
different.
of, I think, um lot of interesting things. I guess we sort of just sort of go down maybe the list that I had and sort of talk a little bit about it. But
Yeah,
I mean, first up, like with any patch, there's a new zone. The new zone was, of course, Zereth Mortis. Very similar, sort of a little bit different than Korthia, I'll say. And like we talked about Korthia last week, very convoluted in what you need to do. I think Zereth Mortis was a little bit more straightforward,
yeah.
a little bit more guided in terms of like how you approach the zone. Um,
It was
and yeah, I mean,
at the same
it's
time,
okay.
it was fairly freeform as well, right?
Yeah,
Once you got through the campaign quests, you needed to get reputation in order to get the ability to recraft your Unity Legendary at a higher item level on whatever slot you wanted to put.
hmm
Um, and you could kind of just do anything. It didn't even necessarily need to be stuff in the zone. Actually, no, I take that back. For rep, you needed to do stuff in this.
yeah,
For the currency that you needed, you could do anything. You could do raids, you could do PvP,
hmm
anything really that was an end game activity. Like I think even battlegrounds gave cosmetics.
I believe they did.
I have not done a battleground since the beginning of the expansion, so I don't know for sure, but I think they did. Um, but yeah, this also kind of marks, and this came up actually in the Preach interview,
Yeah,
funnily enough, marks a little bit of a shift in their design where the you compare Korthia to and the Maw to this. Like Korthia and the Maw are and Torghast are all obvious or had been designed to be this thing that you did every day, all the
right,
time, the whole patch. You were not supposed to finish them, really. I mean, you could, but it would be like the end of the patch, and you would take 3-4 weeks off, and then you'd have new patch, new content, and another daily grind to do.
right.
Um, with Zereth Mortis, the only thing that you needed to do for power, really, was reach revered reputation, which
Right.
meant going through the campaign. The campaign give a significant amount of reputation, um, and then really you would do your like world quests every day. Um,
Yeah,
Not the daily quests. The daily quests were kind of bait. It gave either no, sometimes in some cases literally no reputation, or
yeah,
very little reputation. They were pretty much all worth skipping.
yeah,
But the world quests were the thing you did, and then at the end of your like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you're done.
yeah.
More power.
Yeah, and it even had like a cool like side um like grind if you wanted to do it, which is for like your little Pococo thing.
Yeah,
And so like the research and stuff you could do there of like 4 different tracks, and you know you could eventually get enough points to get everything in all those tracks. But
right.
no, it was a cool zone. It sort of went back to like not went back, but like it it had a lot of not only was it very freeform, but it had a lot of collectible stuff in it, which I don't
Right.
think like I didn't like I interacted with this a little bit, but like it had the whole protoform synthesis system, which was
Right.
like where you could craft mounts or pets and like a huge amount of them.
Yeah. There's
Right.
if you're going for one of the mount achievements, that's actually I it's probably no longer a good way because I'm sure all of the materials are now crazy expensive because people are gonna be trying to, finish off their collections and such. But for a while
Yeah.
it was like a great way to just pad your mount count or your pet count if
Yeah.
you're going for one of those achievements. Um and like I know Sinzu, fellow Peak person Sinzu, I think has 100% of them. Like
Oh wow.
he went through the system, uh, and but at the same time, it was completely optional. Like I didn't touch it. I've got a quest for it still in my bags. I haven't done. I'm probably just gonna
I've
delete.
I've crafted a couple of mounts like when I get because like you need like to actually craft the mounts, you need like the green regular currency that drops from everything, and then you need like specific like green something. I don't forget what they're called. They look like star maps,
Right.
is the actual icon. And then you need like a common reagent, like a blue reagent. And so like whenever I get like one of those like green like star map things, I'll like see if I have the other reagents for it and like just make them out because it's
Right.
like easy
It's
enough. But
yeah.
yeah, I think I think I targeted one mount, which was the there's a cool spider model mount, like a
Okay.
spider mech thing,
Yeah.
like protogener sort of style spider, and then there's like a wasp mount, which I thought was cool.
Yeah.
Like a little bug mount.
Like
Uh
so that's really a very noticeable difference from like a player
yeah,
perspective. Um, and we'll talk about the raid and the tuning stuff there, but I think really the only reason that the raid was bearable was the fact that we didn't have to log in every day and do stuff after
yeah,
the first couple
yeah.
of weeks. Like, so the typical patch cadence applies here. We had patch release. There's no new raid open or anything. Just 1 week new patch. Just go do the
Hmm.
zone, go do the rep stuff, go do the dungeons, all that kind of thing. Actually, not even new dungeon effects, so it's still old dungeons.
Yep.
Um, and then heroic release week, and then mythic release week. And I guess we can kind of get into the raid stuff a little bit, unless you
Yeah.
wanted to get into Orgast first.
Yeah, we can talk maybe a little bit about like so Torghast didn't actually have too many changes coming into this.
Right.
The only thing they added was like a new boss rush mode, which
Yeah.
I think I did once or twice. Where
Um.
like you basically have like eight, what is it? Like you basically go through like eight different layers or eight
Yeah.
different levels, and like they're increasingly harder and harder boss encounters. And so there's a cool like new thing as a part of Torghast. I think I did it once for just the achievements.
Yeah.
Um, and that was it. I'd forgotten about it to be completely honest with you until I did the notes for
Yeah.
this.
I'm.
Um,
I'm not gonna lie. I have actually never even zoned into that.
okay. It's not that exciting.
And the reason for that is actually like Brewmaster is not one of the specs of the game. It's good at killing those bosses. It's good at living the bosses, but they're just
Right.
really slow slogs. And the touch of death build that like makes it bearable in regular Torghast, you really kind of can't do because it relies on stacking things up by killing a bunch of mobs. You
Right.
can get the powers that make it work. It's actually fairly easy to do in the boss rush mode from because you get a bunch of extra powers.
Yep.
Um, but you can't stack it up because you can't go and kill like whole floors of trash.
Right.
Um, which like that's the fun part of Torghast as a brewmaster is you get your no cooldown, ideally AoE touch of death, and
Yeah.
then you just like murder entire floors. Um,
Rush through it.
and then you get to the end and you hit Fort Brew and you have 8 million health and you one shot the boss. That's the fun part. You cannot reach that part in the boss rush mode. And really, like I think tanks are some of the like easiest slash best if you want to get the achievements from it.
Yeah.
Because they're just like you won't get randomly one shot by stuff basically. It's much harder to do than on the DPS class. But at the same time, I think it's also the most boring.
Yeah. No, I can see that. Yeah, so I did it on my Mistweaver, I think with like like my mage pal. Sort of went through it, and yeah, it's just more Torghast. It's like an interesting sort of mode they added, but like again, it's one of those things where like if you liked the boss rush, you'd like it, but there's no specific reason to do Torghast because the one thing you typically would have needed like the cosmic flux dropped from everything else. So it was like
Yeah,
you
and
got
in
to pick
large
what activity.
quantities. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to pick what activity you did. Um, so yeah, there was that. I'm trying to think. The only other thing before we get into the raid is just the new legendary. So like Unity, you mentioned it
Yeah.
came from Zereth Mortis. So Unity was your sort of double legendary thing with this patch, where like Unity
Yeah.
basically gave you whatever your covenant specific legendary power was. And then you could equip a second legendary that was sort of a class or spec specific one.
Yeah.
Um,
And I know I complained about this at release time that Brewmaster didn't have good Covenant legendaries, and I stand
yeah,
by that. It was a much bigger increase for some classes and specs than others, like
yeah,
Mistweaver.
yeah. It was not. It was nice to have Fallen Order plus plus whatever else, like ancient
So
teachings, right?
yeah, you would play like Ancient Teachings plus your Fallen Order legendary. You'd have a low cooldown
Mhm.
on Fallen Order, although that did get nerfed that patch, right?
It did, yeah. The yeah 9.2. So it was no longer every minute you could get Fallen Order. It was every like minute and a half, 2 minutes basically. So it wasn't. It was basically a fairly large nerf. Like it wasn't like Mistweavers didn't crush. They were still very good, but it wasn't as crazy as it used to be or as it was in 9.1.
Yeah.
So um
They also so you have a note in here about the mob being dead. And good riddance. You no longer
yeah.
have to go back to it for anything basically except for entering Torghast. Um,
Yeah, they
and
made no updates this patch to it.
no updates this patch to it. And also notably, like you could never fly in the maw. Zereth Mortis, you did unlock flying once you got through the campaign.
Which
So
was yeah,
you
good
did your
change.
campaign, and then if you wanted, you could actually fly around. Like if you wanted to collect stuff for protoform synthesis, or you wanted to just collect everything for achievements, get all the
Mhm.
treasures and all the rares and all of that stuff. You can get on your mountain fly, and both that and actually the Unity Legendary were account wide. Um,
Yes,
so
they were. A lot of those unlocks were now account wide. Mhm.
you didn't even need to like redo the grind on multiple characters. Like that's one thing we actually had players on my team that were like, "Oh man, this sucks. I gotta do this grind on like, I want to play alts, right? I gotta do this grind on like 3 characters." And I'm like, "No, I know this is not standard, has not been standard practice, but you only need to
Yeah,
do it the first time, and then your other characters just get it. Like you
yeah,
don't
which
need the
which is
reputation."
awesome. Yeah, that was a big change. I think, and even with Zereth Mortis, you could skip the campaign on your alts. Like they added a skip.
Yep,
It was generally not a great idea because I think you
renown.
mentioned the campaign gave a ton of rep, but it also gave a ton of renowned.
Yeah,
So if you needed renown catch up on your alts, like you wanted to
yeah.
do the campaign because it was really good.
Doing the whole campaign was probably 40 renown, or
Yeah.
very close to it. So if you used one of, at this point, the catch up item for renown gave you renown level 40, which is the end of patch 9.0, basically. Um,
Mhm.
and so getting through the remaining 40 levels, the campaign was a great way to do it. Like, it's a little bit slow, but at the same time, that's a lot of renown. Like, the alternatives are
Yeah.
like doing 40 dungeons, doing 80 arena matches, doing a whole lot of raiding.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
it was a great way to like go turn on a TV show and just like go through the campaign for the fourth time on your alt.
Yeah, which is a nice, again, nice change. I feel like we're talking about like just nice changes, but it's just like it's so cool like that. I mean, it seemed like this was like the patch. Like after the ripcord being pulled, they sort of continued that through with these
Yeah,
next two patches, right?
and I think like looking ahead a little bit, that is part of why I am a lot more positive about Dragonflight. Like Dragonflight is really the first expansion release since Legion, and the first expansion release since I've been raiding that
Hmm.
I'm actually like really like positive about. Not apprehensive like I was for BFA or Shadowlands.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would say that it's been a while because even Legion for Mistweaver was like, I hope you make changes, and then they
Oh
don't make
yeah.
changes, and then it's like,
Uh
oh great, this is
uh
what we're getting.
oops.
But we
Yeah.
don't need to go back that far.
Yeah.
But no, yeah. So I mean, I think to wrap up, I guess maybe Zereth Mortis and a lot of the outdoor content with this one. I think all in all, like solid changes. Like Zereth Mortis was a fun zone if you wanted to interact with it. It was a ton of collectible stuff, which I think, to be fair, is like something that Blizzard had been missing. I think they overdid it in that like there was almost too much to collect.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was still it was cool. It was a nice little zone.
At the same time,
Um,
kind of like the old Timeless Isle, there's just a lot of stuff to collect. So there's a lot of
yeah,
reasons actually to come back to it later. Um,
exactly.
in the
Yeah.
same way that like you can go back to Timeless Isle and collect like Transmog, and I think there's a number of mounts from Timeless Isle,
Hmm.
um, and all of that kind of stuff. So and it's not all tied to a rep grind. Like it's not
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
doing whatever grind gives you the most optimal rep per minute on your main, just like one-shotting stuff in the same way that some grinds just devolve into. Um,
Yeah.
so that's kind of cool.
Yeah. It was nice. It was nice. Well, cool. Maybe we turn our attention to the raid and a couple of not only like the raid, but a couple of the systems that came in with the raid. So,
Yes.
um, I guess we can start with Sepulcher as a raid and the fact that they missed the mark on the tuning a little bit.
A bit, just a wee bit.
Yeah. So I mean, I think, first half of the instance, not too bad. Like I think like everything up to Halandris was okay-ish. Like I think the sausage or the Sagne, however you say that boss, like the movement there was like we struggled a bit like on Mythic, like getting the movement just right. The fact that it was a little off, but eventually slogged our way through it. And then I don't think there's any other interesting bot like Zymox. I think is still a cool ball. Like the
Yeah.
design, like they could bring
Zymox
a Zymox
2,
back
yeah.
every expansion, and I'd be fine with it. Like at least
Yeah.
once in the raid tiers like that come out. So
Honestly, I'm a little bit disappointed that they killed him. That we killed him in that
yeah,
encounter. I would actually it would have been cool to have him be a reoccurring boss. Like he can go between realms. There's no reason he needs to, be confined to Shadowlands the expansion. But we did kill
yeah,
him at the end of that encounter, so he won't be returning in Dragonflight. Although,
yeah.
who knows? It's the land of the dead.
Yeah, I mean the portal ability I think is still one of the cooler abilities that Blizzard has put in raids lately.
Yeah, yeah. The
So
there is I remember speculating before the raid release about how they would tune the raid and about the impact of tier sets, the impact of like double legendaries being gated until the third week of the raid. It was like the fifth
yeah, I
week of
think it
the
was like
patch, but the third mythic week. And oh man, all of our speculation was wrong. We were like, they're not going to
yeah,
tune the early bosses around it. Like the early bosses are going to be a pushover, and then you're going to hit Anduin, and Anduin's going to require it, or maybe the Anduin bosses like Halandris and Live
yeah,
are going to require it, and then you'll go do Anduin, and Anduin really needs you to have everything, and then from there on,
yeah.
it's going to be tuned around those two. Oh boy, they tuned
Er,
the whole raid around you having double legendary. I mean, like for regular human beings, right? Not world
Yeah,
first raiders. World first raiders did not need those items to clear the early
yeah,
bosses. Um, but the power gains on those were so huge that it really felt like regular human beings were intended to, like regular raiders that aren't on that level were really intended to have those items before they really progressed into mythic. Um,
right.
and that kind of like led to a lot of, I'll call it, degeneracy around heroic splits and things like that.
Yeah,
So heroic week, right, for the raid, the world first teams are all doing their heroics, right? That's just normal. That's been their standard operating practice. Um, and you hit mythic week, right? Mythic week, normally what happens is you go and you, like the world first teams, like jump right into mythic. They go,
right.
they clear some bosses, and then they go back and they might do more heroic splits once they hit a wall, and then they go back to mythic and they continue. Um, so as Tuesday rolls around, and this is somewhat due to the staggered release, which we didn't actually mention. They only released the first
Yeah,
8 bosses the first week. Um, they released the final 4 bosses that had not been or final 3 bosses that had not
three.
been tested. The second week, and your tier set was locked behind those 3 final bosses, so you could not complete it until you cleared those 3 bosses, unless you got extremely lucky from your Mythic Plus or P. I actually don't even know if you could
Yeah.
get it from them. I,
Yeah. I think you had to kill the
I
bosses
well,
to
no, because
enable
like the Mythic Plus
drops.
and PvP vaults.
Oh, they have it all, whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I
that's
don't
true.
actually know if you could the first week. They might have disabled it. It was such a low chance
Mm.
it didn't really
Yeah.
knows. Um, I didn't look at it. It's possible that people got it, but I don't remember. Anyway, um, so nobody had their four pieces on Tuesday, Wednesday when the NA and EU resets happened.
Right.
Um, and in order to get them, they had to just go and reclear the instance again. And if you're gonna go and reclear the instance again, you might as well do your heroic splits again.
Exactly.
And it turns out that the early bosses were actually tuned for you to have them. So nobody really did Mythic on Tuesday at all.
That was it was taunt. They basically sat in heroic all the world first guilds. This is like it's different than what I think most people had expected, right? Because I mean, I think
Yeah.
everybody, even like I think Morgan did an interview with this where he was like, "Yeah, we all woke up like ready to watch like the guilds go through it," and he's like, "They're all in heroic." We were like, "What? Why?"
It
But I
turns
think
out the
they,
tier sets were too good and their tuning was too high. There were
yeah,
not any Mythic Vigilant Guardian kills until Wednesday of that week.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
which is funny. So yeah, that was, I mean, that was an interesting thing. I mean, it was cool that they added back tier sets, and I don't we didn't really talk a little bit about this, but like it was cool that they added back tier sets after
yeah,
so many it's been since BFA, like the launch of BFA. So
yeah,
that final tier in Legion, right? And Taurus, right? Was that the last one?
yep,
I think. Since we've had tier sets. So it's cool they added them back. They were interesting. I mean, at least I think they were like all tier sets where some classes got interesting ones, other classes got really boring ones.
right.
Par for the
The
course for tier sets that have
Yeah,
been in the game forever is like that's literally the
yeah,
the feedback you'll see on any tier set, any tier before this that had tier sets. It was like, cool. Some classes get like either spec defining or like rotation defining tier sets, and others just like more damage on your steady shot,
right.
right?
Yeah,
Um,
and I think the main thing about these is really just that the power level was extremely, extremely high
yeah.
on your tier set, to the point that very little mattered besides having your tier set on for a lot
Hmm.
of classes. For Brewmaster in particular, um, the tier set
Yeah, force
was
that was crazy.
just a night and day difference. Even just like it was worth wearing, despite the fact that it could literally kill you. Um, which they
Well,
did
early on.
they did eventually fix, but it could
Yeah.
literally kill you. We have clips of people like doing Zymox. Like the situation that would happen is you have to kick smash things in order to maintain your buff. Your buff would expire when you're out of range of things to cast on, like when you're running the portal on Zymox. Um, and uh, then you would lose over half of your health. So if you
Mhm.
happen to be around half your health, which is not that uncommon as a brewmaster, suddenly you're at 1 HP and any random ticking damage just immediately kills you.
You're dead, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun watching we ran a brewmaster for all of Prague. It was fun watching him randomly fall over on Vigilant Guardian like early on.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, tier sets were in, and tuning was crazy. I mean, like Halandris was a 300 pull boss, I think, if they didn't change it for most guilds, which
Yeah.
is crazy for mid tier one. And like the difficulty, while hard, was like very uneven in my mind. Like
Yeah.
if the way that I remember it is I feel like even Desagne was more difficult than Lahuvum was, and like Desagne was the first boss of that wing, and
Yeah. So
uh, Lahuvum was the
I
last. So
I've commented on this before that sometimes they tune the fun out of encounters. Like you have encounters with like fun mechanics that are interesting to play with
mhm.
and fun to do, and then you
Yeah.
just attach such high levels of damage or damage requirements to other things that it just like you don't get to really focus on and enjoy the fun mechanics. You just have to do these kind of like very boring HPS or DPS checks, and that
Hmm.
was really what Dasein or Dasegne, however you say it,
How we say it? Yeah.
felt like to me. Where like you have this neat like thing where you're doing with the rings, but
Hmm.
um the amount of damage that the whole fight
Oh
dealt
yeah.
was just like you didn't get to sit there and enjoy it. Like I understand. Like, I want the fights to have some challenge to them, right? I don't want this to be classic, where, or even worse, like classic vanilla, where people are literally killing bosses in 30 seconds. Um,
Right.
that's not what I want. But at the same time, there is a level where the numbers are just so high that you, or high on the wrong things. That is a very important distinction, I think. High on the wrong things. Um,
Yeah.
and you just don't get to enjoy the fun things because you have to focus on other things that are just not interesting. Like I've done DPS checks on ads and kick rotations on ads a million times. I've done, hey, we have this really heavy damage to the raid phase. We got to sort out healing cooldowns. That's all. That's just like normal stuff.
Right.
It should exist, but you know, if the numbers on it are
Well,
so big you don't get to do the fun mechanic, or you don't get to really focus on and enjoy the fun mechanic, it makes the fight less fun. And that is just saying. And I think that applies, I think, to a lot of the bosses in this instance. That criticism.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it highlights to me on that fight just because like like the dodging the rings coincided with a ton of damage on your raid. So like as a healer, it was people are spread, people are moving, and then you have to heal them, and you also
Yeah,
need to use potentially some cooldowns there with the rings, but then you also need to save like those same cooldowns for the intermission. So
yeah.
yeah, I mean that fight was just move like the movement requirement plus the damage plus everything else was like a much. And then you went from there into what is it, proto form, the
Prototype
proto
Pantheon.
people, the prototype pantheon, which is honestly just I've said this before, it's literally mechanic vomit.
Yeah.
It's like they were like, we have all these cool mechanics we want to use, but we don't have a fight for it. Let's put it in the council fight where they just spit mechanics for like 5 or 6 minutes, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you go, then Lahuvum is like, does no damage. It's just literally two DPS checks. If you meet those two DPS checks, you kill the boss. And
Well,
it's just like,
then there's also the Hoovum had three things, right? It had one, making the DPS checks on the ads. You set up your CDs so they didn't really matter. A lot of guilds did the kill two ads at the first one, and then just the
oh,
whole raid on every one after that, and that was fine. Um, but it had two other really important mechanics. One was the moats and breaking the moats, which that was actually, I think, a really fun mechanic that just
yeah,
needed a little bit of like usability work to really shine. Because
yeah,
doing the flower patterns was actually really like that was neat. That was cool. I
yeah,
got to do the like I was the one that broke every set of flower patterns, so it was always me plus one DPS doing it, and that was a fun mechanic to do. But then you had like the push pull red blue mechanic, um,
in the middle of that.
that was awful. That
Yeah.
was awful. They
And it,
effectively removed it in season four, uh, but it was awful.
yeah.
Doing the thing where you had to like have your groups set up a certain way to so you had like five people per stack, and then if any of them got randomly all red, you needed to like swap a blue person over to it so that they could do it and make that call on the fly. Like, and that's all very doable, but it's very uninteresting and just like, oops, we died. Because like what
Yeah.
happens is if one person misses it, now there's a stack of four red and a stack of one blue, and all five people die.
Yeah.
And then the tech mechanic being extremely visually confusing. That was also not
Yeah,
fun.
that's true.
Like it wasn't
That's
hard;
true.
it was just unclear.
Yeah, what was going on? Yeah, so I mean, Lahuvim was sort of whatever, and then of course you get to like Halandris, which I don't think we talked about this boss probably at the time. I think Halandris in its original iteration. So we did about probably 40 to 50. I think we did 40 or 50 pulls on the actual like the set before the nerfs. I think is what we ended up doing. I forget though for sure. It was a fair. It was either a night or two worth of pulls on it.
Yeah,
Um
this actually
and
reminds me. I gotta update proc
what
stats for Vault of the Incarnates.
nice.
So more
Um
work to the file.
yeah. So I mean it was I I did not enjoy it. Like I think there's a place for super hard encounters like that, and I just don't think it's in the middle of the instance, right? Like I just didn't. There were two like we only really got to phase two probably like a handful of times, like probably less than
Yeah,
5 times, right? So not even making to phase three or the final room. And that second room, when like literally if one person dies, your bomb rotation is screwed. It's just like too. too much. Like I
Yeah.
think it's too much going on in general. So
We
I was not a
were
huge fan of that fight, I'll be honest with you.
we were 130 pulls in, starting to
Okay.
see the second intermission uh, when they gutted the boss. Like,
Yeah.
and honestly, I'm still not a fan of how heavy-handed they were with it. I understand why, because of how the rest of the instance was tuned. But honestly, I
Right.
would rather they have gutted every other instance, every other boss in the instance, and made Halandras the actual end boss. Just like swap him in the jailer and like
Yeah.
rewrite the story mid raid. Like, let's go. Because the fight was a ton of fun, very mechanic, like very intense. This is one of those fights where it was tuned high, but I think the tuning was in the fun mechanics for a lot of it.
Okay.
Like the bombs were fun, the tank mechanic was fun. The interactions, the interplay between all the different positioning requirements made it a very uh, exciting encounter. You were constantly doing things. There were some RNG issues early on that we didn't run into because we later where like sometimes your tanks would have all four orbs spawn on the same side basically, and it was just extremely difficult to handle that with how things were tuned. So they fixed that, so you always get them. They're like roughly spread around the room, um,
Right.
but they're still random, so you don't have you don't do exactly the same thing every pull. Um, and just the whole thing was just like very tightly tuned, very fun to do. Numbers could have been a little bit lower, and that would have shaved off a number of like a large number of pulls for a lot of guilds that had the classic 5% wipe.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but uh, this is actually I think the whole right wing really is kind of a lot of the mechanics. They were all a lot of the bosses were just like hard
Right.
in a numbers way, and in Halandra's case also a mechanics way. Um, but also uh, the hardness, the high numbers were put in good places. You look at like Skolex. Uh, I mean, the Skolex has very few mechanics. There's only so many places to put the numbers, and it all makes sense. It forces you to do things that are fun, even if they're
Right.
mostly rehashes of previous mechanics. It's still combined in new ways that make it interesting to do. So they like the numbers forcing you to focus on the things that are fun was really good. Zymox a little bit less so. There's a lot of like random ticking damage and stuff that was just like very high and unpleasant to deal with. Um,
Yeah.
but then
Couple of
also,
weird post third platform
yeah,
movement, like specific, like very precise movements
yeah,
at that place. So
and actually Zymox is a little awkward because after some of the damage nerfs and acquiring your double legendary and stuff, um, the uh, there were some very awkward timers you could get
yeah, yeah,
that we ran into that made the boss like we went in there, we'd had like a 0.2% wipe or whatever. We were expecting to just like kill it really quickly, and then we had like 10 pulls in a row where we just had ridiculous overlaps where we pushed at times that made things impossible because we had you know uh, we basically lost our portal at a time. It was not possible to deal with,
yeah,
and they eventually fixed that, but that was very frustrating.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I mean, then you leave sort of like leave Halandris and all that fun stuff, and you go to Anduin, which was like just as many pulls. Like, I mean, I guess Halandris was probably overall more uh
Yeah,
in the way that it worked, like averaged out. But like then you went to, Anduin, which had again like DPS checks, positioning checks, healing checks, even,
yeah,
right? Like all over the place, which I enjoyed Anduin in terms of the fight itself. Like I think
yeah,
the raid splitting, the up and down phases were interesting enough. Like the down phase had something for healers to do other than just make sure DPS don't die,
yeah,
which I always think is fun to add. Intermissions were fun with like the walls. I like, I don't know. It seemed like a more forgiving version of Paintsmith
yeah.
in that
Actually,
like you still had to move as a raid group. There was still some level of precise movement, but like it wasn't overly difficult.
yeah,
A lot of it was just like a fun little patchwork style like burn
yeah.
phase in the middle of the fight.
I think the fight had like three main issues with it that all got you know neutered
Yeah.
in season four.
Yeah.
or end of actually season 3. And those are the blasphemy mechanic uh triggering when you touch somebody that doesn't have it.
Yeah. Oh,
That
yeah.
was that was not fun. It wasn't hard in like a really skill testing way. You know, if you play with a goblin and they just happen to be around and you just touch them, you died.
Yeah.
Or and actually even worse, you have like Sylvanas doing backflips all over the platform, Bolvar and Thrall are around, Jaina's
Right.
around, and they all are scaled and look like regular players. So on a number of occasions, I would like be running over to clear my thing with somebody and like curve around it, and it's like, oh, okay, that was unnecessary. And
Yeah.
sometimes died because it timed out because I did that, and that's just like mega tilt.
Yeah. Yeah. I forgot about the NPCs being annoying. Yeah.
Uh,
Um,
the second thing that I think really was a miss that they didn't actually neuter is the add cast time buffs, where like the first casts is like 4 or 5 second long, and then the next one is half that, and the next one is half that, and the final one is
uh-huh.
half of that. Is effectively instant. Um,
Solar beam.
it's just like not fun to instantly wipe because your second CC was, you know, a fifth of a second off.
Yeah.
And it's because they also suffer from DRs. So like if you're overlapping CCs, it's also not good. You're gonna like run out of CCs. Um, that was just really like not fun. Specifically because of
Yeah.
the level that it reached. Like it would be one thing if it were like a second long. You still have to have a CC rotation. Um, but you don't have to. It doesn't have to be the same level of precision. Like there's a little bit of like number a little bit too big there, I think.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then final mechanic that I think was kind of a miss is actually the stars bouncing in phase 3 because
I didn't. So, yeah.
it was a non-mechanic, but it was
Yeah.
it was annoying. It was just
Yeah. It was.
annoying.
It was just annoying enough. No, I feel you on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I liked the double stars throughout the rest of the encounter. I thought that was
Hmm.
actually like uh
Yeah. I'm back. Yeah.
yeah, that made things way more interesting. And I
Hmm.
really wish that they had just nuked blasphemy from the start, which is what they actually needed to do. That's
Yeah.
just 100% the mechanic that needed to get nuked, and they refused to do it until very deep in the season after they had nuked literally every other mechanic.
Hmm.
And I would have rather, like, kind of like Helandras, I would have liked to keep the double stars and just have blasphemy not be a thing like it is now. Like, you have to do it, but it's not a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, it's I mean, it was definitely it got much easier once they made those changes. And I think even I mean, we'll talk about this maybe in a bit on season 4. Like I think Andon became probably my favorite season 4 fight
Yeah,
because of the way you could speed it up in a way that like was fun,
yeah,
right?
yeah. There's a
Um
lot of these fights that I think have a really good core that just, like, had, like I said, had the fun tuned out of them by putting the numbers really big in the wrong places.
yeah. No, yeah, for sure. For sure. Um so then you go from there and you get Lords of Dread and Ragalon, I guess out off of Anduin. I guess we can talk about maybe Lords first. Like this fight, I I didn't hate, but at the same time, it was like one of those fights where like if you have even like one of your raid, like everyone's got that one raid member who just doesn't have the best awareness, like doesn't they might be a good player like in other areas, but like there's certain things where like if the mechanics are like not the same every time, they
Mm-hmm.
struggle. They just struggle a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And like Lords is one of those things where like if you don't have your head on a swivel, like there is just
You're
green
dead.
stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
And then like the fact of like if you make a mistake with green stuff, then the next time like you clear the green stuff,
It's
there's more
harder
green
for
stuff.
everybody.
And it's
Yeah.
harder for yeah, and it just becomes sort of a cascading thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, Lords though, as an overall fight, I don't think I minded. It was definitely like a in terms of difficulty, I'll say like a step down.
Yeah.
It was still pretty healing intensive though. Like as a healer, really from Anduin on, like every one of these fights, like I was like literally at the like on the edge of like people are dying because you have the add on Mythic on Lords
Yeah.
that like is AOing the whole raid, and then you
Yeah.
know You have like the actual just AoE phases are big, and then just people taking random ticking damage from getting too many stacks of the
Yeah.
green thing. So,
I will
um,
say I hate Lords of Dread. I think it is easily like the second or third worst boss of the whole expansion. Um,
okay.
and where a lot of the other bosses in the instance, like I said, there's really good mechanics and it's just tuned in a way that sucked the fun out of it.
Uh huh.
There's virtually nothing redeeming about Lords of Dread. The one like redeeming mechanic kind of is the Among Us mechanic.
Oh
Um,
yeah, that was cool. Yeah.
which once they broke the auto solver Weekara, which was correct for them to do, right? Once they broke the
Yeah.
auto solver Weekara, um, like that was kind of a fun mechanic to do. And then I guess the double damage amp was also fun, but in like a big numbers go burr kind of
Yeah.
way, not in like a mechanically interesting way. Um, but uh, remember at the start when you passed your bugs to somebody else to not get too high on stacks, it disoriented them,
Yes. Which is just
which
annoying.
is just negative fun. Like that's
Yeah.
just negative fun right there. And it also causes some really annoying stuff with tanking, where like if you get disoriented, the boss turns and hits the other person. Uh, which like ideally you don't have that happen to you, but
Right.
some point somebody's gonna walk into you trying to get their bugs out of melee, and it sucks.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
this fight also had really big visibility issues, specifically with the addition of the boss bugs. So that it kind of had this alternating phase thing going on, where like in one phase you had to be close to people, and in the other phase, when the boss cast Carrion Swarm, bugs came out from him, but it wasn't the same pattern every time.
Yep.
Every time they went through a phase, it would add one. So it starts off as 4, then 5, then 6, and it goes out. So first it goes out in kind of a square, then in a pentagon, then in a hexagon, and that just means that it's really difficult to learn. And because of the way you tank the boss, where one's inside the other, it was very difficult to tell where he was facing. It was just an awful mechanic in general, and the fight would have
Yeah.
been significantly better if they just didn't have it.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So that was, I mean, Lords. Yeah, I guess I mean I didn't mind it, but I can understand the frustration, like particularly from like a tanking perspective on that one. But I
yeah,
agree, Among Us was a very cool new mechanic. And then Rygalon was literally just a DPS check, I feel like, and healing check. Like that was just a standard. Like you have a lot of healing to do at all times, and you also have a lot of damage to do at all times.
yep,
And hopefully you pull it all together.
yep,
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say about that one. Like, wasn't many mechanics. Like the soaking mechanic in the intermission was interesting, where you had to soak the orbs or whatever,
right,
and then the tanks had to soak them as they exploded, which I thought was like
yeah,
a
I
cool thing
like
for.
that.
It's not interesting for tanks, I guess, but it's still like, hey, I have something to do other than
The
move this
like
boss in these specific positions.
the like
So
interactions with the tank swaps and things you could do with Celestial Brew and other
yeah,
absorbs made it way more interesting. Where like
yeah,
it's not just soaking the thing; it's soaking the thing while coordinating tank swaps with your tank so that you like die.
yeah.
Um, that was interesting. I think that the only real miss for this boss, in my opinion, is just how rippy the uh the what are the quasars are,
Okay.
where you get your dark eclipse. Somebody accidentally steps into a quasar portal that doesn't have dark eclipse, and then it's just over. Raid's wiped because
Yeah. Initially, yeah,
you had
yeah. Because you
exactly
had
the
4 and
number.
4. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And honestly, like this would have made the fight significantly easier, but it would have been a lot more fun to progress if you just you couldn't interact with those portals unless you had Dark Eclipse.
yeah. Yeah, but I see why they wanted to like it does make you because like there's not much else going on, like particularly in Mythic, like in that or sort of up phase. It's like you have the
Yeah,
people who get the whatever it's called, whatever deep of it is where they have to go down, right?
right,
And then you have the soaking, so those like the orbs you have to soak. But
right.
other than that, like there's not much for DPS to do. So like having a slight like I feel like it only really affected melee people, I'll be completely honest with you. where like particularly me who like if I had to run out because I was always one of the soaks for the orbs. Like if I had to run out and get like a soak for an orb that wasn't directly in melee,
Yeah,
it made it interesting. I definitely ran over those portals
yeah. And
doing
that's
that,
really
but
like I just don't. I think it was very frustrating. It added a lot of frustration, but it didn't add a lot of like. There was not. It was very high downside, but not very high upside. Basically, is what my two
yeah,
cents is. Um, and if they had changed that, honestly, I think the fight would have just been like straight 10 out of 10. Very few
yeah,
complaints. Um,
yeah,
the rest of the fight was just good. Like it was just a good fight. Um,
yeah,
and you still would have had like if they turned off being able to interact with the things without Dark Eclipse, you still would have had to manage, when you killed the Quasars, and you still would have had to manage, killing them in good spots so that people could get to them with minimal movement and like keep up DPS on
yeah,
the boss, and everything else about managing them stays the same. It's just that you don't randomly wipe to somebody accidentally.
yeah. Exactly, exactly. So, and then I guess the final fight we got Jailer, and I mean I think my thoughts on Jailer are I hate line of sight mechanics, and so like phase one to me kills the rest of the fight because you do that so many times. Like
Yeah,
I like it was the
phase
the
one
overall fight, or sorry,
phase one has a lot of the same problems that Ajara had. Mandatory assignment week, or prevalence of line of sight mechanics, uh, mind controls. That's not actually the jar.
yeah,
It's a very annoying thing where like it's effectively a one shot if you fail the
right,
mechanic, just instantly kills you. And honestly, oh, like I could go actually on and on about how I would change phase one to make it way 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 better.
yeah,
But I'm not going to because we have other things we want to talk about.
yeah.
I think you're
It's
about to
time
say
life.
like phase two onward stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like phase two onward, like I liked like phase two was interesting. The movement was cool. Like mind controls underneath the boss was like a good way to position it, and like the fact that like you had like a spread mechanic, collapse mechanic. So like
Yeah,
even like the line soaks were interesting. So I mean, like everything from that point of view, like phase two onward, I think was fine. Phase three was very much like I think somewhat like phase two, except with I think more specific movement requirements, where
yeah,
like you had to move in specific ways, and then also you had to also position in specific ways, particularly for like the ads that would spawn.
yeah,
You had like the nice star pattern if you did it
yeah,
that way. I like the usage of like the healing like lines to buff damage.
yeah.
Like I like that there was a dual purpose of like not only healing the center, so I guess Azeroth itself, but also buffing your damage. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, phase three was fine. Then phase four was just, I mean, unfortunately for me, I didn't get a chance to progress phase four.
Yeah,
Um, but so when I did it, phase four was like you just kept damaging and you won.
yeah,
But like the death sentence and sort of the meteor soak and stuff like that, I think we're fine. So I think, I think you're right. It suffers from a lot of the same Ajara issues in that like phase one is just not very good, and for me killed the majority of the fight.
yeah. Phase one is
Um,
also long.
yeah, it's probably one
The
of the
longest part
longer
of the
parts of
phase.
that
Yeah,
fight.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think like phase two onward, Jailer's a good, maybe great fight. Um,
Yeah.
there's some numbers things from early prog that were changed before I got there that I think were good changes. Stuff like the tank mechanic in phase two was just this really, really big magic dot that tanks just can't interact with, so it's just a healer mechanic. Uh,
Mhm.
and that was just like kind of awful. They cut the dot in like half or by three-quarters or something, and that made the experience much more pleasant. Um, at least according to people I know who were doing it when that nerf happened.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and I mean, other than that, like uh, phase two is fun to do as a tank. I've done it actually now as tank and ranged, and phase two is just like pretty fun. Um, the Yeah, like phase two is fun. Phase three is fun. I actually really like the Azerite Soaks mechanic on the whole. I
Yeah.
think it suffers a lot from the numbers being stupid on it, like the stacking damage taken from it makes it really annoying. Like just
Yeah.
randomly dying because you stepped into it like half a second too soon and refreshed your stacks, and so instead of going 1 2 3, you go 4 5 6, and you
Yeah.
weren't planning on that, and the sixth one just kills you.
Yeah.
That was annoying. But other than that, I actually really liked the mechanic overall. For a lot of the reasons you already said. Uh,
Yeah.
Phase 4 in particular. So I did that. You know, after a lot of, like, they finally gave up on trying to fix the boss shield thing,
Yeah. And just like, yeah, set it to
just set
whatever.
it to be the
Yeah.
thing. And so we did it that version. We killed it actually the Sunday before the Omega nerfs that hit it.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest single round of nerfs since Jaina Broadmoor.
Yeah.
Uh, and um, honestly, like Phase 4 is also fun. Like there's just a lot. Like everything after Phase 1 was actually like pretty good.
Hmm.
To do at least at the point that I did it. Phase 1 was just ass.
Yeah. Any fight that has like line of sight mechanics is just as a healer, it's one of the most frustrating things to deal
Yeah,
with,
I
and
mean,
I hate it.
I think Phase 1, even if they had left in the line of sight mechanics, because it's not that frequent, right? You only have to line of sight the mind control casts. Um,
Right.
the line of sight mechanics could have been left in, and it still would have been like okay. Wouldn't have been S tier, but it would have been okay. The big
Right.
thing for me that killed it is just the holes. They're extremely janky. People get clip into the edges coming back up, get stuck, fall back down, and die. People, like, you have a very precise window that you have to jump in. Even on heroic, actually, you have a very precise window that you have to jump in order to get
Right.
back out and not get thrown off the edge.
Right.
It really should have just been like Maiden in Tomb of Sargeras, where just like you jumped in and it sent you back out. Just very
Yeah.
consistently. You don't have to worry about specific timing. Just jump in, get sent back out. That actually would have also kind of reduced the need for the assignment week work, because you would have had 15 seconds, or not, like 10 seconds for all 6 people to just find a hole, jump in it.
Yeah.
And if you saw somebody, jump in a hole, then you knew you needed to not jump in that one. You would go jump in a different one. You still probably would want one for consistency, but it maybe wouldn't have been this like mandatory weak aura that broke time that you had to have in order to do the fight.
Yeah. No, for sure. So yeah, so that's Jailer. I mean, honestly, I would say that Jailer ended up being for me worse than Sylvanas, definitely worse than Sire in terms of end bosses. So
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's how Sepulcher sort of ends up, is like just known for being like extremely difficult and sort of maybe over the top in terms of the way that they handled mechanics, and
yeah,
then you know the round of nerfs, which I think in in retrospect Blizzard did a good thing here. Is like you can't fault them for making sure they sort of lowered the difficulty in a way where like it was still hard for the majority of guilds that did it, right? Like I
yeah,
don't think there's a, like we talk about them like destroying Halandris and destroying Jailer and things like that, but I think at the end of the day, like because the difficulty started so high, the nerfs were always going to be large, right? It wasn't like they
yeah.
took like a vigilant guardian and have the boss's health and like everything did half damage. Like it
Right.
wasn't like that sort
Yeah,
of nerf. Like the
yeah.
bosses were extremely difficult. So
I I
um
I think Halandris is just unfortunate because of the way that basically the fight only worked because of the tight tuning, or at least because of the
right.
tight HP tuning. And once you break that, there's a bunch of mechanics you just kind of get to it. Um, so that was really annoying. And then the Jailer, my only issue with the way they nerfed it is that basically everything after phase 1 now you just like skip half or all of. Like you basically don't do phase 3 or phase 4 now.
Yeah.
Even without faded fixes. You just like you get to phase 4 or you get to phase 3, you get your Blood of Azeroth buff, and you just push Bloodlust and you just sit there and you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So no, so it was interesting. I guess we have to sort of speed run this half part
I think
since do want to get to Dragonflight.
I think the one thing that I really want to talk about from 9.2.4
Hmm.
um, is cross faction rating.
Yep.
And I don't really have a lot to say on it, other than this is just like a strictly good thing that has a bunch of still pretty annoying rough edges. Like guild bank
Yeah.
access is a big thing for us. We have a lot of consumables stored in the guild bank, and our alliance players can't access them.
Hmm.
Um, Communities are very buggy still, so sometimes inviting things is weird. But honestly, it's been really good.
It works really well. Yeah, and I think this is just a precursor to what we've talked about last week in some of the interviews where like cross faction guilds are coming.
Yeah,
right? Which I think will always be a good change. So yeah. So then so that was 925. Not too much else, like you said, in it. There's a handful of other smaller things, not important. And then 925A, as they called it. I didn't realize they called it A, but the season 4 faded patch. We've talked a bunch about faded. I think the only thing that I would want to say here is that I hope that they bring back this for the final season of Dragonflight. Like I hope that they bring back a maybe not as long as Faded was.
Yeah,
Maybe it's like it becomes like an 8 week thing, like a 2 month type thing versus I think what Faded has lasted almost 3 or 4 months, right?
yeah,
August, September,
that's
October,
correct.
November. Yeah, so like maybe it ends up being like a 6 week thing, they open with everything faded. You can do whatever you want. Go back farm mounts, go back get specific items for the next like expansion to level with. But I think overall faded and the dinar system, I think is cool for an end of expansion like last hurrah,
Yeah,
and still give teams something to do. I
I
don't know. Sorry.
I generally agree with that. I think that they made two major mistakes with it for Shadowlands. One is the raid rotation. Um,
Mhm.
I think the affix rotation is okay. The raid rotation, you just don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you need everything open. I think raid rotation, and if they do affix again, affix rotation, I think they just need to kill.
Like
Like
I understand from a queuing perspective, like what they're trying to avoid is too many queues. You want to funnel everybody into a single queue so that they are you're able to find groups instead of having a half full group for Castle Nathria, a half full group for Sanctum, and a half full group for Sepulcher. You have one group that's like super full,
yeah,
or two groups that are full, or just Castle Nathria. Um, and honestly, maybe they just rotate heroic and below, and mythic is just all of them are open all the time. I don't know, but
yeah,
like just let us kind of progress at our own pace because they said this was not going to be a kind of progression tier, and it was not a real progression tier. Like it did not take as long to progress in any way,
yeah.
but there was still reprog. They tuned up all the bosses. A lot of stuff like Castle Nathria, half our raid either hadn't done, probably three-quarters of a raid either hadn't done or had done with a different.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and
Um,
even with Nath, you're not even doing even if you do it with the same guild, it's still been over a year since you
yeah,
did any sort of Nathria boss. So it's like you still had to relearn it.
yeah,
Plus the affixes themselves changed the way you like looked at fights or
yeah,
did fights.
yep,
And so, yeah, I think in my mind, just open it all up at once. Don't do revolving rotations of affixes. The affixes stay what they are for that boss. And like,
yeah.
even if they might even maybe
Yeah,
they just do one
I,
affix,
I,
right?
I can I
You
can
know?
get on board with that for sure too, because that was another frustrating thing of like, okay, we do Liavum the first time, and we have to learn how to deal with the soaks being absolute, nonsense on that
Yeah.
fight, and then we have to go back the next time, and we have to learn how to deal with I don't remember what it was, oats. Oats
Moats,
was
yeah.
mostly fine, except for like learning when we had to like grip it in and click it in order
Yeah.
to like not even to
Maximize.
capitalize it on it. Like we were trying to min max it a little bit, but honestly,
Yeah.
like learning which ones we just couldn't get value out of and just had to like throw away um before they exploded, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah.
Um
So oh, sorry.
yeah, I just our experience with season 4 as a guild, I think would have been significantly improved if we had been able to do Castle Nathria week 1 and then go back into Castle Nathria week 2 and you know knock out those bosses and maybe go back into Castle Nathria week 3 and knock out those bosses again and just like
Yeah.
really develop that muscle memory of those and then add in Sanctum, then add in
Right.
Sepulcher. We have the skips, so we could, once if we could spend, 3 weeks in a row just doing Castle Nathria, third week we probably, do the skip, kill the
Yeah.
Nathrias, and then go start on the next raid. That would have been great. A lot of
Yeah.
the frustration was around like we have a week to clear everything, and if we don't finish, you know, we have to kind of start from scratch.
Yeah. Then it's another two full weeks, right? Two full
Yeah,
other raid weeks before you get back to that point.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. That was I think the one major downside. But other than that, I had fun with Faded in general.
yeah.
So
I do think that actually the faded fixes were just not good for Sepulcher in particular. I've talked about this before. Those bosses are just too mechanically complex to just add these affixes in, by and
yeah.
large. I
Yeah.
think they're just stuffed to the brim, and adding one more thing, they just kind of tipped all apart.
Yeah.
Um,
No.
Other bosses, I think they were way better on. A lot of the
Mhm.
Sanctum bosses were fine. A lot of the um, Castle Nathria bosses are fine. Although Denathrius kind of runs into the same issue, beginning of phase 2 in particular. Um,
Yeah,
but other than that, it's fine.
not too bad. Yeah. And I guess the only of the moving, I guess, ahead a little bit, swing it to Dragonflight stuff. The only final patch 927 just brought in the region-wide commodities auction house. So basically, it sort of brought together all of the commodities now work region-wide. So all of NA
Yeah,
shares the same gems, herbs, flasks, consumables, things like that. Amazing change. I think we talked at length about this at the
yeah.
time, but this is just a huge change in terms
Just
of um
yeah,
yeah,
huge
like
huge upgrade.
quality
Yeah,
of life for smaller servers in particular.
huge
So
upgrade. And I think that without this, they could not do the crafting stuff that they're doing in Dragonflight.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. Um, well, cool. So I guess let us sort of now in chronological order, sort of talk a little bit about Dragonflight coming up. So like started at the top of the show, Dragonflight is launching tomorrow or today if you're listening to this when it releases on YouTube slash podcast audio version goes up. And yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, or sorry, not the biggest thing, but one of the things that Blizzard got ahead of is a lot of things are going to be disabled. A lot of weekly reset items will be disabled until your weekly reset. So while the expansion launches, it's I think it's 6 p.m. Eastern in the US on Monday evening. It's midnight, UTC in Europe. A lot of things will not be available, like weekly things will not be available until your reset. So that's
Yeah,
Tuesday at 11 in NA, Wednesday for EU. So like things like Mythic Dungeons aren't going to be open. A bunch of your weekly quests, weekly PvP quests, any of your weekly professions quests that are coming into Dragonflight, things like that will not be available until reset, which is good. It means you don't have to like sprint and get an extra
yep.
resets worth of quests or mythic zeros in.
There's no pressure.
Um,
That's nice. This is
exactly.
kind of how we assumed it would work. It was supposed to work like this in Shadowlands, but they missed some things.
Right.
Um, they also turned off Great Vault. You will not get any Great Vault rewards for stuff done this week.
Uh huh.
So you're not, gonna log in on Tuesday and get an eye level, 370, 411, whatever item from your Great Vault. There's just no rewards at all. Stuff
Right.
done this week. Which is honestly a perfectly acceptable. Like if this prevents the stuff where people were getting like high level stuff from their first Great Vault in Shadowlands or the first Mythic Plus box in BFA, like
Yep.
good. Like
Yeah.
you don't need the gear at this point. It's worse
It,
than
it,
questing gear in the late end of the Dragonflight leveling process. It's fine.
yeah. Yeah. So it's nothing, but I think we always expected it, but Blizzard came out and sort of announced it, which was nice. So no reason to sprint to level. The other thing too this week that came in with a bunch of resets that'll be live for Dragonflight launch is a couple of monk changes. I'll start with the Mistweaver ones. In general, Mistweaver received a bunch of damage increases. So some solid damage increases to Tiger Palm, Rising Sun Kick, Spinning Crate Kick, and even Blackout Kick, which I think is good. So our single target damage definitely goes up. Blackout Kick slightly increased, so a little bit more AoE, which is nice. But the actual bigger set of changes comes from the fact that Awakened Phalanx now does more healing to less allies. So it's now 50% of the damage done, up from 25%, which is a massive increase to 3 targets, down from 5. So you lose sort of some targets there, but you do additional healing to those 3 that you'll hit, which is probably the largest increase here. Um, and then they also fixed an issue with copied blackout kicks, which is hilarious because that has been an issue every time they make changes to blackout kick. They always forget the fact that the copied blackout kicks are a different spell ID and not on our
Yeah,
typically are not on our aura. Yeah, we
yeah,
found out that was a big issue actually in Legion that we found was that the blackout kick copies were doing, I think, like 20% less damage for most of the expansion because it missed the initial buff that came in
yeah.
early on. But yeah, so solid single target buffs to Mistweaver, which people always say Mistweaver does no damage. Disagree wholeheartedly, but now we got damage buffs because yes, people complained about it.
Yeah. I mean, to be
So
fair, no damage is really extreme, but the damage was on the low side compared to other heroes.
yeah, but it wasn't. yeah, it wasn't the death of Mistweaver that
Yeah.
most people like to talk about. So
Speaking of the death of monks, we got brewmaster changes. So the first thing we got this week is a set of nerfs to our damage. In particular, Storm Snout's last keg got a 30% reduction to its damage. That's multiplicative. So it went from 30% increased keg smash damage to 20% increased keg smash damage. It is still extremely good talent. You will still take it pretty much all the time. It is now slightly less mandatory, but honestly, just having a second charge of kick smash. And then charged passions, uh, ate a 50% nerf. It went from
yikes.
100% to 50%. Um, and I think the reason for this is primarily two things. One, Brewmaster damage was just still really high.
Uh-huh.
And two, Charred Passions was a big contributor to that, and it was actually so good that it was pushing out other options in the tree. Like if it didn't work with Charred Passions, basically it wasn't worth considering.
Uh-huh.
Which basically just means like Blackout combo is dead in the water. A bunch of the Tiger Palm related talents just don't functionally exist because Charred
Mm-hmm.
Passions was too good. So I think that's why they did it. Problem is, damage was really the only thing that Brewmaster had going. Like Brewmaster
Gotcha.
did a ton of damage, just a ton of damage. And so by hitting it so hard with like this is probably a 10%. Um,
Yeah.
by hitting it so hard, it's kind of cutting into that one thing that Brewmaster really had going for it. Um, so initially, like looking at this, things were looking pretty grim. But and this is important, if you stop listening, start listening again, we got a bunch of undocumented changes. Um,
Mm.
so I first found out about these. Somebody was linking an Equinox tweet, which was like probably the least useful way to ever report a change, like posting like spell numbers. It's like, I'm sorry, but that's meaningless. So we had to get on into verification properly by checking the AP ratios and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but we got three buffs. So we got Gift of the Ox healing increased by 60%. So this counteracts the 40% increase to our HP, which then reduces the spawn rate of Gift of the Ox by 40%. So
Mm-hmm.
this is actually more than compensatory. Um, we got Celestial Brew, got buffed by 40%, so it's exactly in line with the HP stuff. And then Pretense of Instability, actually, which was 10% dodge for 3 seconds after you use Purifying Brew or Celestial Brew. That got changed to 15% dodge for 5 seconds. It's actually a really huge buff and takes the talent from being kind of worthless
Right, right, right.
to being actually pretty good. Like the dodge has way higher uptime now. It actually gets
Oh,
close
nice.
to like our Purifying Brew cast cadence is around 7 to 8 seconds. You cast Purifying Brew, so now this buff went from being under 50% uptime, and honestly, like because of the short duration, the uptime number is deceptive, and it was very easy to just have it do nothing because you happen to not get auto attacked in that 3 seconds,
Right.
um, or only get auto attacked once, really reducing its value. Uh, Bumping it to 5 makes it way more reliable. It's up well over 50% of the time now, and the dodge buff that it gives you is, better.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps. Um, Brewmaster still has some issues, specifically with regards to magic damage. And actually, the one that I'm way more concerned about related to Dragonflight launch, which is stagger scaling. This was an issue in Shadowlands as well. Like in BFA, stagger was actually just so good, so like the numbers on it were so high. Even
Mm-hmm.
though we had stagger scaling in BFA, it didn't matter.
Right.
It just did not matter at all. Um, but in Shadowlands, after they nerfed stagger in literally every patch of BFA, and then again in Shadowlands pre-patch, it finally reached the point that stagger scaling started to matter. Um,
Yeah.
so then the issue you run into is that it actually scales so hard off of agility that Brewmaster is barely functional until you get gear in the first patch because you're going up. If you're in questing greens, the difference between questing greens and normal raid eye level gear is like 60 or 70 item level.
Mhm.
The difference between Mythic 0 gear and Heroic gear is like 40 item level, or 30 item levels. Whereas for a typical like patch 9.0 to 9.1 or 10.0 to 10.1 is going to be more like you're looking at 15 to 20 item level or 15 to 30 item levels of change at most. Like
Gotcha.
it's way smaller. And the kind of like numbers for stagger tend to be a little bit inflationary from tier to tier. Like your stagger number in practice goes up very slightly, by like a couple percent every. So it's actually even less than that practice in order to get equivalent levels of stagger in the second tier expansion
Yeah.
compared to the first. Which basically just means that if you're playing Brewmaster, the first tier of this expansion, you need to hard grind agility. Like
Yeah.
you don't. Basically, what I'm saying is like you don't have to. You obviously don't have. To. But what I'm saying effectively is, if you're playing Brewmaster and it feels bad, if you feel squishy in particular against physical damage, check your eye level.
Yeah,
Like,
you see more eye level, yeah.
do not drop item level for anything. On any item that has agility on it, do not drop item level for anything. I do not care if your lower eye level item like has stats on it. I don't actually it probably is even incorrect to drop too much item level to turn on your 4-piece, your tier set.
Yeah.
Item level is going to be so important
That's hilarious.
that this first tier, like you because I have very vivid memories of this. I was asking Kiov in 9.0 like why it felt so bad. Like my Brewmaster just felt really squishy. And I was asking her about it, and she was like, "Yeah, it felt really bad for me too until like round 13 eye levels and keys." And then it felt good, and it was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, I can do that."
Now it's all better, yeah. Yeah.
And so that's my big thing. Um, but yeah, so
That's funny.
exciting. We are just about out of time, but I did want to touch on. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. Leveling.
Yeah.
Obviously, like that's what happens tomorrow. When the expansion releases, what are you guys doing for leveling?
I mean, for every expansion, it's always the same. It's like sort of a free for all. So, like, if you want
Yeah,
to level in a group, it's sort of like puts together a group and sort of when people can play. I think the only thing we have is sort of like just make sure you get your mythic zeros done week one. So like, and it's always like ask for help if you need it. So like, we
yeah,
typically have probably like probably like 2 to 3 people that will run mythic zeros on multiple characters or have multiple characters leveled,
yeah,
or just run them just to help the guild. Like we have a
yeah,
druid that I think is responsible for getting most of our raiders at least 115 done
yeah,
um every patch cycle for the first like 3 or 4 weeks of it, just to make sure you at least get that one vault
yeah,
piece. So yeah, I mean we're pretty lax about it. I personally I have a friend or a buddy that we've leveled together the past like 3 expansion launches. So him and I will
yeah,
probably get on. I won't, unfortunately, I will not be on right at launch. So I won't get on till about 7-ish at the earliest, I'll
yeah.
say. It's about an hour after it launches in my region. Because I have family stuff to do, unfortunately,
Uh,
this time. But yeah, no, it'll be pretty lax. Hope the goal for me at least is to actually make it to 70 before we go to bed Tuesday, or sorry,
okay.
Monday night. Since I think most people are saying it's about, if you focus and push, like a 5 to 6 hour type thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I'll get as close as I can. Probably not stay up too late. Maybe like
yeah,
midnight, 1 a.m. at the latest, and then come back the next day.
yeah. People's prep for it in my guild has been very different this expansion because we have somebody in the guild that is a speed leveling person.
Oh, okay, cool, cool.
So they have a route, and they've shared their route, and so a bunch of people have done prep to do the route. And
Oh, nice.
I'm over here like, yeah, I'm gonna log in and level solo.
That's
They have
awesome.
groups that they're gonna do together. They're gonna do the route,
Mhm.
and they're gonna like level fast and be level 70. It's gonna be great and like good for them. Um,
Yeah,
we don't have anything organized. Like I'm leveling solo. I'm gonna go through.
yeah,
I'm gonna take my time. I don't have to be level 70 until, um, you know, by the end of the set basically in order to get my mythic zero runs in.
that's
Um,
awesome.
I do want to get like I play tank. I want multiple characters ready, so I'm probably leveling my monk first, then my death knight, then my paladin.
Hmm.
And ideally, I get all 3 to 70 in the first week and get mythic zeros on all 3. That's a tall order, honestly,
Yeah.
because I'm not taking time off work for it. So that may not happen, but I'll definitely get like at least the monk and the DK, I think.
Very cool. Very cool. Very, yeah, that was, I mean, my plan is to at least get the monk up, get my mythic zeros done there, and then depending on where we are at the week, start my druid. Because I think druid's going to be my second class. Because I really want to try and maintain an alt this time through. So
Yeah,
we'll see. We'll see. So
yeah.
well, cool. I think that's it. I mean, goodbye, Shadowlands, I guess. I mean, there were
It's
definitely
over. I'm
some
not
low,
logging
low
back in.
lights.
Oh, I actually have one more thing. I'm not
Okay.
logging back in until Dragonflight launches, but I would not if I were on a big server, which I am.
Yep.
I would not log out in either in Oribos, in Orgrimmar, or at the Zeppelin Tower
Oh
for
no.
the boat of the new expansion,
Yeah.
because
It's
that's gonna be like that's the most likely place you're gonna run into like chain disconnects and not be able to.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
actually logged out over in the Barrens, which is a short like minute long flight from the Zeppelin Tower, but it's a completely different zone, which means that I should be able to zone in. And if things are crazy, then we can do like realm hopping stuff to get ported over to a dead server like Terralion.
Yeah, exactly. That's what so I'm probably gonna, I don't know, there's a bridge between the Barrens and Duratar
Yeah,
that you cross over. Then there's a watchtower, whatever, right there. I think
yeah,
all my alts are there at this point. I just gotta move my monk over there. So
yeah.
that'll be where I log in at basically.
There's a
Um
um, there's a flight path at the very north end of the Barrens that I parked mine at because it also has a Hearthstone, so it's instant logout.
oh
Very
nice.
convenient.
Yeah.
So I parked there, and then my mage, which is Alliance, I just flew down to like the fall and just like
Yeah. Yeah. That is a good tip. Yeah. Definitely don't want to be in any super heavily populated area for sure.
yeah,
So
yeah. But yeah, that I think is going to be it for the show today. Thank you all for watching and or listening. Uh, Shadowlands is how to run. That's for sure.
that is for sure. I think next week we'll probably talk about anything but Shadowland or Dragonflight, right? It'll probably be we'll probably just rehash some more Shadowland stuff, I would assume.
Yeah,
Right? That'll be the
yeah.
maybe.
We're just
No,
going to talk
probably
about
not.
Shadowlands.
No, I'm joking. Good
Uh,
riddance on this place. No more Maw talk, no more Torghast. We just
uh,
get fun things now.
I,
We get to
I'm
talk about dragon riding,
At
all
some
that
point,
fun
I want to
stuff.
talk about Steve Denizer, the interview with Noble, and how he doubled down on the jailer stuff, and how fucking mad that made me, honestly. But that is not the topic for today. Um,
Awesome.
and yeah, that's it for the show. I think actually, both me and Anomaly are going to be working on updates to the Discord today. So if you
Yes.
want to
Mistweaver
support the show
sections.
and the work like that we're doing, you can do that over on our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity and join the Discord. I'm going to be working on the brew resources section for brewmasters with tips for things like what build should you play while leveling or doing mythic zeros, what should your gearing priorities be, and it should be agility. And what should your initial look for raid talents be, and things like that. Anomaly, I'm assuming, is going to be doing some pretty similar things with the Mistweaver resources that also are.
Awesome. Yep. Correct. I will be all over that Mistweaver resources section. So
But yeah, that is it for the show. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you in Dragonflight.
bye.